There is something people misunderstand about surviving a heart attack at 68. They assume the body is the only thing that breaks. But the truth is quieter than that. What really fractures is the way people begin to measure you. Their voices change. Their expectations shrink. Their eyes start calculating what comes next. For me, that realization arrived on a cold Tuesday afternoon in Vancouver, the kind where a damp Pacific wind slips through the streets and carries the faint smell of salt from the harbor. I had just finished a slow walk along Cole Harbour seawall, my cardiologist's strict instructions still echoing in my head. 20 minutes, no hills, no rushing. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The message came from my son, Daniel Mercer. It was short, brutally efficient. Dad, the board scheduled a vote for Thursday. I stood there for a moment, watching a float plane skim the grey water before lifting into the sky. The engines hummed low and steady, the sound vibrating in my chest in a way that reminded me my heart was still healing. Thursday. 2 days away. That boardroom vote wasn't just another corporate formality. It involved Mercer Industrial Systems, the manufacturing company I had spent 39 years building. The same company Daniel had recently begun describing to his friends as his future. I typed back slowly, my fingers stiff from the wind. About what? The response came almost instantly. Leadership transition. A strange phrase. Carefully chosen. Corporate language always hides something. A jogger passed me, shoes slapping softly against the wet pavement. Somewhere behind me a gull screamed over the harbor. And in that moment I understood something unsettling. The vote wasn't scheduled because of my heart attack. It was scheduled because of what someone believed the heart attack had done to me. Later that evening, Daniel called. His voice sounded polite. Controlled. But there was something else underneath it. A kind of quiet certainty. Dad, he said, you should probably start thinking about stepping back. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched the evening fog creep across the harbor lights. Then I asked one question. Is that what you want, Daniel? There was a pause on the line. Then he said something that would change the next 36 hours of my life. But here's what I didn't know then. The Thursday boardroom vote wasn't the real story. The real story was why it had been scheduled so quickly, and what my own son had already started doing behind my back. At 68 years old, I had learned that companies and hearts fail for similar reasons. Not because of a single dramatic moment, but because small stresses accumulate quietly over time until something finally gives way. My cardiologist, Dr. Elaine Kwan at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, explained my condition in careful language the morning after the attack. Your left anterior descending artery was 92% blocked, she said, sliding a printed angiogram across the desk. We placed a stent. The damage was limited. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee drifting in from the nurse's station. You were lucky, she added. I nodded. But luck had never been the principle that built Mercer Industrial Systems. Discipline did. I had founded the company in 1986, in a rented warehouse near Burnaby Lake, with a single milling machine and $18,400 borrowed from the Vancouver Coastal Credit Union. Back then we manufactured precision components for shipping equipment along the Pacific trade routes. 39 years later, we supplied parts to 7 ports across Western Canada. But I rarely talked about that. My late wife, Margaret Mercer, used to tease me about it. You built a company the size of a city block, she once said over breakfast, but you still introduce yourself like you run a hardware store. Margaret passed away in 2018, after a quiet 18-month fight with ovarian cancer. Since then the house in Kitsilano, 2 blocks from the water, had grown quieter. My mornings were simple now. Coffee at 6:30 a.m. A slow walk to Jericho Beach. Then reviewing financial summaries from the company while the kettle cooled beside my desk. Every Wednesday afternoon I still visited the office downtown. Mostly out of habit. My executive assistant, Raj Mehta, had been with the company for 23 years. When I returned after the heart attack, he met me in the lobby of our building on West Hastings Street. Mr. Mercer, Raj said carefully, lowering his voice, you shouldn't be here yet. I'm walking slower, I told him. Not disappearing. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Raj always understood balance sheets and people equally well. But here's what I didn't know then. While I was learning how to pace my breathing again, someone inside my own family had started treating my recovery like a vacancy. And vacancies, in business, rarely stay empty for long. My son Daniel understood that rule very well. Generosity can look a lot like good business judgment when you're dealing with family. At least, that's what I told myself for years. By the time Daniel turned 35, Mercer Industrial Systems was stable enough that I had begun shifting certain opportunities toward him. Not because he asked directly, but because I believed succession should happen gradually, the way a seasoned foreman hands tools to an apprentice. The first sacrifice came in March 2017. Daniel wanted to launch a logistics consulting firm connected to the port operations our company serviced. He called it Pacific Channel Advisory. Over lunch at the tea house in Stanley Park, he spread out his business plan across the table while rain tapped softly against the restaurant's wide windows. "I just need startup runway," he said, tapping the spreadsheet with his pen. 6 months, maybe 8. "How much?" I asked. $47,300. The amount was oddly specific. That was always Daniel's habit. I wrote the check 2 days later. He hugged me outside my office on West Hastings Street. "Dad, I won't forget this," he said. For a while, things seemed promising. The second sacrifice came 2 years later, in July 2019. Daniel and his wife, Lauren Mercer, had fallen in love with a townhouse development in North Vancouver's Lower Lonsdale district. The mortgage approval fell short by a frustrating margin. "Just a bridge loan," Daniel told me over the phone one evening. I could hear traffic behind him, horns echoing faintly through the phone speaker. "How short?" I asked. $82,600. I transferred the funds that same afternoon. Lauren sent a thoughtful thank you note afterward. Handwritten. That was something I respected. She had always been polite with me, even when Daniel's impatience showed through. The third sacrifice came quietly in September 2022. By then, Daniel had taken a more visible role at Mercer Industrial Systems. I transferred 18% of my non-voting shares to a family trust that would eventually benefit him. The valuation paperwork from Dunlop and Pierce Corporate Accountants placed the transfer at $318,750. Raj Mehta looked at the document twice before filing it. "Are you certain?" he asked gently. "Yes." "You're accelerating the timeline." "I'm preparing him," I said. But I remember one moment that lingered longer than the others. The day I handed Daniel the trust documents, his handshake was brief. His eyes drifted past me toward the office window where our company logo reflected against the glass tower across the street. He wasn't rude. Just distracted. To be fair, Daniel had good qualities too. He was disciplined. Organized. Always punctual. When Margaret fell ill in 2017, he drove her to chemotherapy appointments twice when I couldn't leave the office. I never forgot that. Still, as the years passed, a quiet question surfaced in my mind now and then. Was Daniel learning the business? Or learning how to inherit it? But I ignored that doubt. Fathers often do. And on a cold Thursday evening in late October, that habit of trust was about to cost me something far more complicated than money. The sentence that changed everything was spoken on Sunday, October 22nd, just after 7:40 p.m. It happened in Daniel's dining room in North Vancouver, during what was supposed to be a small family dinner. The house overlooked the harbor, lights from the container terminals blinking in the distance like quiet machinery working through the night. Lauren had prepared roast chicken. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen, warm and comforting. For most of the evening, the conversation stayed ordinary. Weather. Mortgage rates. Traffic near the Lionsgate Bridge. My granddaughter, Emma Mercer, who had just turned 8, sat beside me drawing little sailboats on a sheet of paper with a blue crayon. "Grandpa," she said softly, "do you still make the big machines at your company?" I smiled. "Sometimes," I told her. Across the table, Daniel was scrolling through something on his phone. Eventually, Lauren asked the question everyone had been carefully avoiding. "So, what did the doctors say about the heart attack?" The room grew quieter. I wiped my hands with a napkin. "Recovery will take a few months," I said. "Dr. Kwan wants me walking daily and keeping my schedule light." Daniel finally looked up. "You mean you're still planning to work?" he asked. The tone wasn't curious. It was skeptical. "I'll still attend board meetings," I said calmly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Then he said it. "Dad, be realistic." The air seemed to cool around the table. "You almost died," he continued. "The company needs someone fully functional running it." My fingers tightened slightly around the glass of water in front of me. Ice shifted quietly inside. "I built the company," I said. Daniel shrugged. "That was 30 years ago." Lauren glanced down at her plate. Then Daniel added the sentence that still echoes in my memory. Honestly, Dad, after a heart attack like that, you're basically useless in a boardroom. Emma stopped drawing. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator behind us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply set my glass down and looked at my son across the table. There are moments in life when anger would be easier. But precision is stronger. So I said nothing. Later that night, I drove back across the Burrard Inlet Bridge, fog drifting across the headlights. My phone buzzed with a notification. Daniel had posted a photo from dinner on social media. The caption read, "Family dinner with the next generation of Mercer leadership." I wasn't in the photo, and as I parked outside my quiet house in Kitsilano, a single realization settled into my mind. Something was already moving behind the scenes. I didn't know yet what I was about to find. The investigation started quietly on Monday morning, October 23rd, just after 9:10 a.m. Old habits from decades of running a manufacturing company don't disappear simply because a cardiologist recommends fewer meetings. When something in a system feels misaligned, you check the numbers first. So I logged into the Mercer Industrial Systems board portal from my home office in Kitsilano. The window beside my desk was cracked open, letting in the cool salt air drifting off English Bay. Somewhere outside, a garbage truck rattled down the alley. The board agenda for Thursday had already been uploaded. That alone was unusual. Board agendas typically circulated 7 days in advance, not 2. The first item read, Leadership Transition Review, Motion Proposal. Attached beneath it was a draft document prepared by Palmer & Associates Corporate Law, Vancouver. I stared at the PDF for a long time. Then I noticed something else. The document had been commissioned 12 days earlier. That meant the legal work had started before my heart attack. Suspicious, but explainable. Companies prepare contingency plans all the time. Still, the numbers bothered me. So I called Raj. Raj, I said when he answered, who requested Palmer & Associates draft the leadership motion. There was a pause. Daniel did, Raj replied carefully. Did the full board approve that? No, sir. The silence stretched between us. That was Discovery 1. Uncomfortable. But not yet betrayal. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing internal financial activity. This is where my professional instincts mattered. Manufacturing companies live and die by procurement records, transfer authorizations, and supplier contracts. Patterns appear if you know where to look. At 11:42 a.m., one entry caught my attention. A consulting invoice from Pacific Channel Advisory, Daniel's company. The amount was $26,750. Consulting services. But the invoice had been approved directly through Daniel's executive access. No secondary authorization. That wasn't technically illegal. But it violated internal governance policy. So I expanded the transaction history. Another invoice appeared from 3 weeks earlier. $31,480. Then another. $29,920. Each one approved under Daniel's authority. Each one paid from Mercer Industrial Systems operating funds. I leaned back slowly in my chair. The leather creaked quietly under my weight. Consulting contracts weren't unusual. But patterns matter. And now the pattern was becoming visible. By 1:15 p.m., I had assembled the full transaction record. There were 9 consulting payments over the past 8 months. Total value. $248,960. I sat there for a long time. Because now the situation had moved beyond questionable judgment. It was calculated. Deliberate. Still, one possibility remained. Maybe the board had approved the contracts collectively. So I called Margaret's old friend, Linda Carver, who had served as an independent board member since 2014. Linda, I asked gently, did the board ever review consulting agreements with Pacific Channel Advisory? Her answer came immediately. No. The word hung in the air. Then she added quietly, Daniel said you had already signed off on them. That was Discovery 2. The pattern had teeth now. But the final discovery came that evening. At 6:20 p.m., Raj emailed me one more document. It was a proxy authorization draft Daniel had circulated privately to 2 junior board members. The motion scheduled for Thursday wasn't simply about leadership transition. It proposed transferring temporary executive authority to Daniel during my medical recovery period. Duration, 6 months. Buried inside the language was a clause allowing emergency restructuring of executive contracts, including my own. Estimated financial exposure, $1,420,600 in executive compensation control. I stared at the number on the screen. 3 quiet discoveries. 3 careful steps. And suddenly the full picture was clear. My son wasn't reacting to my heart attack. He had been preparing for it. Now I had every document, every number, every date. And Thursday's board meeting was approaching very quickly. By Tuesday afternoon, October 24th, I had already decided the confrontation would not happen in a living room or over the phone. Family arguments blur facts. Institutions clarify them. So at 2:15 p.m., I walked into the offices of Palmer & Associates Corporate Law on West Georgia Street in downtown Vancouver. The elevator smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and cold metal, the kind used in most glass office towers. The partner I asked to see was Michael Harrington, a corporate governance specialist who had advised Mercer Industrial Systems twice in the early 2000s. When he entered the conference room, he looked surprised. "Edward," he said, pulling out a chair. "I heard about the heart attack. You should be resting." "I am resting," I replied calmly. Then I slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed copies of the consulting invoices. 9 of them. Total, $248,960. Michael read the documents carefully, his brow tightening as he moved through the stack. "Did the board approve these contracts?" he asked. "No." "And you didn't authorize them personally?" "No." He leaned back slowly. "That complicates Thursday's vote." That sentence landed exactly where I expected. So I added the second document. The proxy motion. The clause transferring temporary executive authority worth $1,420,600 in executive control. Michael read that page twice. Then he removed his glasses. "Edward," he said quietly, "this motion assumes the board believes you're incapacitated." "I'm aware." "What would you like to do?" I answered with one sentence. "Freeze all executive authorization changes until a governance audit is completed." Michael nodded slowly. "That will trigger a formal review." "Yes." "And Daniel will know immediately." "That's fine." At 5:40 p.m., Daniel called. His voice arrived sharper this time. "Dad, what did you do?" I was sitting in my living room in Kitsilano, a rainstorm tapping steadily against the windows while the kettle warmed on the stove. "I asked for a governance audit," I said. "You blindsided the board." I reviewed the invoices. Silence filled the phone for a moment. Then came denial. That consulting work was legitimate. Perhaps. Then justification. The company needed strategy input. I stepped up because you were in the hospital. The rain grew heavier outside. Finally, bargaining. "Look, Dad," Daniel said, lowering his voice. "Maybe I should have told you earlier. But the vote Thursday is about stability. Investors need to see leadership." I let him finish. Then I spoke carefully. "Daniel." "Yes." "You didn't plan for my recovery." The line went quiet. "You planned for my absence." Another long pause. Then I delivered the only sentence that mattered. I built Mercer Industrial Systems to manufacture precision, not entitlement. I ended the call. The audit paperwork was already filed. The accounts were under review. And Thursday's boardroom meeting was about to become very different from the one Daniel had imagined. Thursday arrived with a cold Pacific rain sweeping across downtown Vancouver. By 8:55 a.m., I was standing in the elevator of our headquarters on West Hastings Street, watching the floor numbers climb slowly toward the 17th floor boardroom. The elevator motor hummed softly above the ceiling panels, a familiar mechanical rhythm that reminded me of the first machines we installed back in 1986. Precision always begins with small moving parts. When the doors opened, Raj Mehta was already waiting in the hallway outside the boardroom. He studied me carefully. "You look stronger," he said. "I slept well," I replied. That was mostly true. The room itself smelled faintly of polished oak and coffee from the catering tray near the window. Rain streaked down the glass behind the long conference table, blurring the grey skyline of Vancouver's financial district. 7 board members sat around the table, including Daniel Mercer. He looked confident when I entered, perhaps even relieved. His posture suggested he expected a quiet transition meeting. "Morning," "Dad," he said. I nodded politely and took my seat. At 9:02 a.m., Linda Carver, our independent board chair, called the meeting to order. "First agenda item," she said, adjusting her glasses, "the proposed leadership transition motion submitted by Daniel Mercer." Daniel cleared his throat. "As everyone knows," he began, "my father's recent medical event makes temporary executive delegation necessary for operational continuity." His presentation was organized, calm, professional. But here's what he didn't know. At 9:07 a.m., the boardroom door opened again. Michael Harrington from Palmer & Associates stepped inside, carrying a thin black legal folder. Daniel frowned. "What's this?" Linda looked toward Michael. Mr. Harrington was invited to clarify a governance matter discovered earlier this week. Michael placed the folder on the table and spoke in a measured tone. "During a preliminary audit review, we identified 9 consulting payments authorized through executive privileges to Pacific Channel Advisory." Daniel's face tightened slightly. Michael continued. "The total amount was $248,960. The room went silent. Even the rain outside seemed quieter against the windows. Michael turned one page in the folder. "Additionally, the proposed proxy motion scheduled for today contains a clause transferring temporary executive authority over compensation structures valued at $1,420,600. Daniel's confidence drained almost visibly. "I was acting in the company's best interest," he said quickly. Linda folded her hands on the table. "Those contracts were never approved by the board." No one spoke for several seconds. Then Raj quietly placed another document in front of the members. The corporate charter amendment I had filed 6 years earlier. Michael summarized it simply. "Mr. Edward Mercer retains 51% of voting control during any medical leave unless he personally relinquishes authority." Daniel blinked. "I didn't know about that." "That's correct," I said calmly. Silence filled the room. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Linda Carver spoke the only sentence that mattered. "The motion is suspended pending full governance review." Daniel stared at the table. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You could have told me." I stood slowly, gathering my papers. "Daniel," I said quietly, "leadership isn't something you inherit during someone else's recovery." Then I left the room. Innocent anchor moment. Later that afternoon, my granddaughter Emma called. Her voice sounded small and curious through the phone. "Grandpa, did you win your meeting?" I smiled. "There wasn't a winner, Emma." "So what happened?" I looked out toward the grey water of English Bay, gulls circling slowly in the wind. "Everyone just learned how the company works." The company felt different after that Thursday meeting. Not louder. Not hostile. Just clearer. By Monday morning, October 30th, the governance audit from Palmer & Associates Corporate Law had already begun reviewing the consulting contracts Daniel authorized. The findings were precise and procedural, the way corporate investigations usually are. The 9 consulting payments totaling $248,960 were formally classified as unauthorized executive expenditures. Daniel wasn't accused of fraud. But the board did require corrective action. The resolution was simple. The funds were repaid in structured installments over 18 months, beginning with an immediate transfer of $52,800 from Pacific Channel Advisory back into Mercer Industrial Systems operating accounts. Daniel also stepped down from day-to-day operational authority during the audit review. It wasn't punishment. It was governance. And companies survive on governance. The clause in the proxy motion that would have placed $1,420,600 in executive compensation authority under temporary control was formally removed from the board agenda. That part never reached a vote. Some people expected me to feel victorious. But victory wasn't the right word. What I felt instead was something quieter. Correction. My own life settled into a slower rhythm again. 3 mornings a week I still walked the path along Jericho Beach, the ocean air sharp and cold against my lungs. Recovery from a heart attack teaches patience in very physical ways. Your body reminds you every day that time is no longer something you rush. One afternoon in early November, Raj Mehta joined me for coffee at Small Victory Bakery in Yaletown after a brief board meeting. The cafe smelled like warm brioche and espresso foam. Raj stirred his tea and looked at me over the rim of his cup. "You could have removed Daniel entirely," he said. "That wasn't the goal," I replied. Raj nodded slowly. "You built the company for him." "Yes. And now?" I thought about that question for a moment. Now he has to decide if he wants to build something himself. The most surprising moment came 2 weeks later. Daniel knocked on my door in Kitsilano on a rainy Sunday evening. His shoulders looked heavier than usual. "Dad," he said quietly when I opened the door, "can we talk?" We sat in the living room where Margaret's old piano still stood against the wall. The rain tapped steadily against the windows. Daniel spoke carefully. "I thought you were stepping aside," he admitted. "After the heart attack." "I was recovering," I said. He nodded slowly. "I see that now." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something close. And sometimes, in families, something close is where repair begins. These days the company continues operating the same way it always has. Measured decisions, clear numbers, and a boardroom that understands exactly who built the foundation beneath it. Meanwhile, my mornings remain simple. Coffee at 6:30 a.m. A walk beside the Pacific. And a reminder that surviving a heart attack doesn't mean the end of your work. Sometimes it simply clarifies who deserves a place beside you while you continue it. If you're watching this and you're somewhere past 60, there's something I want you to understand. Age changes the way the world measures you. It happens quietly, gradually. People begin speaking a little slower around you. They offer to take responsibilities off your plate. Sometimes they even start making decisions they assume you're too tired to question. And sometimes those people are your own family. That realization can hurt more than any medical diagnosis. But here's something experience teaches that youth rarely understands. Strength doesn't disappear with age. It simply changes form. When I built Mercer Industrial Systems, I spent decades learning how to identify weak points in a production line. A machine rarely fails because of one catastrophic mistake. It fails because small tolerances go unchecked until the system drifts out of alignment. Families work the same way. Trust, responsibility, respect, those are the tolerances that keep relationships functioning. And when someone quietly starts moving those limits for their own advantage, the system eventually reveals the truth. Not through shouting, through facts, through patience, through time. There's a reason experienced engineers measure twice before adjusting a machine. Precision prevents damage that emotion might cause. In my case, the investigation that followed my heart attack wasn't really about money or company control. It was about clarity, about understanding who believed my life's work was something to protect, and who believed it was simply something to take. And if you're sitting there right now wondering whether it's too late to protect what you've built, your finances, your independence, your dignity, let me tell you something directly. It isn't. You are allowed to check the numbers. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to say no, even to people who expect you to say yes. Age does not remove that right. In fact, it strengthens it. Because by the time you reach this stage of life, you've already paid the price for everything you have. Years of effort, sacrifice, quiet persistence when nobody else was watching. That deserves protection. And here's the truth I've learned since that Thursday board meeting. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. They will wait. They will stand beside you while you recover, while you think, while you decide what comes next. The ones who don't, they were never really standing beside you in the first place. So take your time. Protect what you built. And remember this. The people who truly love you will stand with you. The ones who don't, they were never yours to begin with.